In 1986, a man in Cameroon, Africa, stumbled upon a most horrific scene. A village of over 1,000 people, all of them dead. No wounds, no blood, just silence. The surrounding communities searched for answers. Was it poison? Suicide? Or was something lying in wait to strike again? I'm DreyOfTheDead, and it's time to feed your head. In the early morning hours of August 22nd, 1986, Emmanuel Mabai hopped on his bicycle and rode out from the village of Wum. As he passed the community of Cha, he noticed a strange smell in the air, grew dizzy, and passed out. He awoke at 8:35 a.m. and continued his journey towards the village of Nyos. It wasn't long before he came upon an antelope lying dead near the road. Why let it go to waste, he thought, before securing the animal to his bike. Just a short distance later, he passed 2 dead rats, then a dead dog, then a trail of dead animals. Maybe a lightning strike, he thought to himself. It wasn't uncommon for electricity to travel, killing all the creatures in a given radius. Finally, he arrived at the village of Nyos and searched for someone he could speak to about the dead animals. But something seemed off. For a bustling village, it was eerily quiet. Too quiet. He walked down to a group of huts and peered inside. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Bodies were strewn everywhere. He searched hut to hut, but not a single person alive. In a panic, he threw down his bike and ran all the way back to Wum. Once officials were notified, the news spread like wildfire. Scientists and non-scientists alike made their way to the area to investigate what caused the mass death of Nyos. Shortly after Emmanuel's return, survivors of the surrounding villages began to trickle in. Many told tale of distant rumbling and an explosion heard the night of the event. They smelled strange smells, and some had passed out for as long as 36 hours, awakening only to find everyone around them dead. Because Wum is in a remote part of Cameroon, it took 2 days for medical officials to reach the area. When doctors arrived, they found a catastrophe far greater than they could have ever imagined. Almost 1,800 people, over 3,500 cattle, and countless wildlife were strewn across miles of land. There was no trace of what had killed them. Whatever it was, it seemed to have disappeared as quickly and as quietly as it had come. Once word of the event reached the outside world, scientists from all over the globe flocked to Cameroon to assist the region's local scientists. The remains of the victims offered almost no clues. There was no sign of trauma, no bleeding, no sign of disease or exposure to radiation. Fortunately, there was also no evidence of prior suffering or agony. It seemed as though the victims just blacked out, fell over, and died. One of the only clues was the distribution of victims across the landscape. The deaths had all occurred within 12 miles of Lake Nyos, and the presence of victims increased as scientists got closer and closer to the lake. In outlying villages, many people, especially those who had remained in their homes, lived to tell the tale. In Nyos, the village closest to the lake, only 6 of the 800 villagers had survived. The disaster wiped out almost the entire population of Nyos, Cha, and Saboom, and created massive displacement of the people in nearby villages. To many in the region, this was not an entirely unprecedented event. Lake Nyos had long been known as the Bad Lake. As legend had it years ago, evil spirits had risen from the lake and killed all of those living near the water's edge. An undocumented but strangely familiar story. But perhaps the strangest evidence found in '86 was the lake itself. Nyos' usually clear blue waters were now a deep murky red. Scientists couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth behind the long-standing fear of the Bad Lake. eyewitnesses of the event claimed corpses lined the roads of all three villages. Some died in their sleep, while others in mid-conversation. A significant amount of victims perished while attempting to escape. Aside from the massive loss of livestock, much of the land was abandoned, leaving food crops to dwindle, devastating the surrounding areas and causing mass starvation. Of the estimated 15,000 people displaced, the military evacuated over 60% of them to surrounding hospitals. Controversy soon erupted over the cause of the event. As scientists searched for a logical explanation, residents of Nyos turned to a spiritual one. They believe the disaster was attributed to an act of disrespect. Before his death in 1983, the lake chief had designated his best cow to be given to the Kwaifon secret society for ritual purposes. When he passed away, his family argued amongst themselves about the cow, ultimately deciding that it was simply too big for the ritual sacrifice. They opted instead to substitute it with a slimmer one. A week later, all of the late chief's cows were seen moving in a line towards Lake Nyos. So when disaster struck, villagers of Nyos believed it was due to the wrath of their departed chief. But some critics had another theory. It was speculated that the disaster was anything but natural and was in fact a bomb test by the Israeli government in collaboration with the Cameroon government. This was evident, they said, by the presence of Israeli forces at the disaster site even before the info reached WOM authorities. In truth, Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres visited Cameroon just days after the event. His convoy and medical officers provided supplies throughout the region. Their prompt intervention made a significant impact to the rescue and treatment of survivors. But villagers weren't the only ones arguing over speculation. Scientists were also in hot debate over the cause of the fatal phenomenon. And what they discovered had them racing against the clock to prevent the next imminent disaster. Roughly 1 square mile in surface area with a depth of 690 feet, Lake Nyos is what's known as a crater lake, or a lake that forms in the crater of a long-extinct volcano. But scientists began to wonder if the lake's long-extinct volcano was really extinct. The theory had its flaws. An eruption capable of releasing enough poisonous gas to kill that many people would have come with some serious seismic activity. None of the eyewitnesses had mentioned earthquakes, and local recordings showed no such activity. Scientists started by taking water samples from the lake. The deeper they tested, the higher CO2 levels they found. When they tested beyond 600 feet deep, the levels shot off the charts. In fact, when they tried to pull the samples to the surface, the containers burst from the pressure. Once they switched to pressurized containers, they were stunned to find the water in the bottom of the lake contained 5 gallons of dissolved CO2 for every 1 gallon of water. The Lake Nyos volcano may have been extinct, but the magma chamber that fed it was still active and releasing carbon dioxide. While it's not uncommon for lakes to release CO2 through circulation, rain, and shifting temperatures, this was a different story. You see, Lake Nyos wasn't releasing CO2. It was building up in the bottom of the lake. They noted the tall hills surrounding the area, blocking winds and creating an unusually consistent temperature from the surface to the bottom of the lake. The region's tropical climate also made it hot all year round. The lake was also so deep that any disturbance on the surface didn't affect the lake floor. All of this made for an unusual phenomenon. It was one of the stillest lakes in the world, making it also one of the most deadly. Water can only absorb so much CO2. At some point, it begins to rival even the most tremendous water pressure, lowering it as it builds. Then, at the slightest disturbance, it begins to bubble up to the surface, creating a tunnel of sorts that invites one giant upheaval of CO2 to break through and release itself into the air. Because CO2 is heavier than air, it displaces air to the ground, making it impossible to breathe. To support their theory, scientists began searching for similar occurrences in the area. What they found was a little-known event just 2 years prior in Lake Myuu, just 59 miles away from Lake Nyos, where 37 people died mysteriously. Next, they measured just how much CO2 was released from Lake Nyos. Their interviews with eyewitnesses in the hills of Nyos revealed that the lake began bubbling strangely just days before the disaster, causing a misty cloud to form above it. Then, on August 21st, the lake suddenly exploded, shooting water hundreds of feet into the air. 1.2 cubic kilometers, or enough to fill 10 football stadiums, of CO2 was released into the environment. Dead cattle were found as high as 300 feet above the lake, indicating the suffocating cloud reached at least that high before settling to the surface. Then, the deadly gas poured over the crater's edge into the valley below at 45 miles per hour. Those closest to the lake never stood a chance. A few people on the hillside had the presence of mind to climb to higher ground. One man, who witnessed his neighbors dropping like flies, jumped on his motorcycle and managed to outrun the cloud. In villages further from the lake, many of those who ignored the rumble and gunshot sound survived. Those who stepped outside of their homes in curiosity collapsed at their doorsteps. The sight of these first victims often brought relatives to the door, where they too succumbed to the gas. In some cases, CO2 seeped into homes to smother sleeping villagers. Many survivors didn't even realize anything had happened until they checked on their loved ones in the morning and discovered no sign of life. Scientists found that only 3 lakes in the world were able to accumulate such a deadly amount of CO2. It had taken almost a year to discover the cause of the fatal event, and by that time it was clear that the lake was once again filling up with CO2. The Cameroon government acted swiftly, evacuating all the villages within 18 miles of the lake and razed them to prevent anyone from returning. For the next decade, scientists worked to figure out a way to safely release the gas before disaster struck again. They decided on a plan to sink a tube just above the lake floor. As water rose in the tube, it would create a filter of sorts for the CO2, form bubbles, and blast both water and gas 150 feet into the sky. Once started, the siphon effect would cause the reaction to continue indefinitely as the CO2 needed to escape. As of fall 2006, the tube was releasing more than 700 million cubic feet of CO2 into the air each year, dropping levels in the lake by 13%. But scientists were concerned that this wasn't enough. The lake still contained more CO2 than was released in 1986. And if that's not bad enough, a natural dam on the north side was set to fail in as little as 5 years. This would not only have caused the drowning of 10,000 villagers, but it would have also dropped the water level in the lake, causing a release of gas 10 times more catastrophic than the last deadly event. It was a race against the clock, but in 2011, degassing was enhanced with 2 additional tubes, and the dam was shored up with concrete. 7 resettlement camps were built to house 4,500 people from the region. By 2013, that population rose to 12,000. Due to a lack of hospitals, schools, and enough land for farming, a number of households decided to return to the land illegally. The majority remains in resettlement camps waiting to return. They have since endured fires and theft from separatist groups, and ultimately feel abandoned by the Cameroon government. If you enjoyed this strange but true tale, be sure to subscribe and check out previous episodes. We put out new videos every other Friday. Sometimes, most of the time, we try. If you enjoy blooper reels, Q&As, and behind-the-scenes footage, be sure to join my Patreon. These are just a few of the patrons who make these videos possible. For those of you who have been waiting for this episode, thank you so much for your patience. Sometimes life happens and I skip a week, I apologize. And then sometimes I pop up with a random episode that you didn't expect, so, just keep you on your toes. As always, thank you so much for watching. Be well and stay strange.